Hello, in today's video we're going to get started with our Bootstrap wireframes project. We're going to download Bootstrap, we'll connect all of the required CSS and JavaScript libraries, and we'll learn a little bit more about getting started with the Bootstrap responsive grid, as well as how to implement some of the interactive features that Bootstrap offers us. So the first thing that we want to do is go to a web browser and navigate to getbootstrap.com, and this will pull up the Bootstrap website. Bootstrap is a framework that it says here. We can use it to build responsive mobile-first projects on the web with most popular front-end component library or a framework. So Bootstrap will give us a few different files of CSS as well as JavaScript that will allow us to utilize kind of common elements or a framework that is utilized on the web, such as a responsive grid. There's a lot of JavaScript elements in here that we'll take a look at, such as user interface things, such as navigation bars and buttons, and all of that good stuff. So we'll get started with downloading this and plugging it into our files, and then taking a look at how to utilize some of its offerings. So on the home page here, you should see a Get Started button or a Download button. You'll also notice in the top right-hand corner that we're on version 4.1. You can access previous versions of Bootstrap here. This may or may not be the exact same version when you get to it, but if it is any different and you want to use the exact same version that I'm using, you can always pull this down and choose 4.1, which looks like this is the current version here. There are some minor differences as they update this. Usually they add to it, sometimes they make changes. If it's not exactly the same though, it should be fine unless you want to use the exact same version that I'm on, which is 4.1 at this point. So what we can do here is go to the download page to download Bootstrap, and this gives us a couple different options. We want to look for the compiled CSS and JavaScript. If you want to do the source files, that's more for like editing and manipulating Bootstrap. If you want to just utilize it, then of course you want to download the compiled version, which is here. And I'll go ahead and download that. So I've already downloaded this on into a folder on my desktop, and what I'm going to do is just create an HTML file to get started with our website. And in order to do that, I'm going to be using Brackets. Brackets is a really nice, lightweight open source code editor. You can follow along with that, or of course Dreamweaver. You're probably more comfortable with Dreamweaver. I like this just because it doesn't have all the bells and whistles to kind of get distracted with. So you're able to use whatever code editor program you'd like. And what I'll do in this is just start my new folder, or excuse me, my new file, and go ahead and add in some of my HTML, which to get started, I'll just add my doc type HTML. I also need to have my head tags, so I'll go ahead and have those. I know I'm going to have some body tags, add a little bit of space there. And actually, before my head, I need to have HTML lang equals English. And then below my body tags, I can close my HTML tags. And I'll go ahead and save this into my desktop folder. I'm going to name this index.html. Index.html is going to be the default file name for the home page on a web server. So your web server is always going to look for this to kind of serve this page first. So it's a good idea to name it index.html. And then within my body tags, I'll just add the famous hello world text to make sure everything is working. Save that. And I want to open this in a web browser, so I should just be able to double click that. And you can see here that my web page is loading properly and I have my hello world text here. So currently we don't have much here. Let's go ahead and add a couple of my meta tags. In my head section, I want to have my character set. Let's get this set up properly. And there's another one that I'm going to add in just a moment once I get to my my Bootstrap page. But this is going to be your general format of the website, just kind of the general structure. I could probably add in a title to this, and I'll add this in the head section as well. This let's call boats and more. That title closes already. So this is going to be my kind of general starting point here. Let's go back to Get Bootstrap and let's go to the Get Started page. From the home page, you can get to it from here. It's also on the left-hand side in the documentation, Getting Started. So this is going to give you the introductory starting point of how to get started with utilizing Bootstrap. And in order to use Bootstrap, there are a series of files that we need to link into our file, HTML file, such as a series of CSS as well as a few JavaScript files. So we've got one CSS file and it looks like about 3 JavaScript files that we're going to utilize. We also need to add something to help with the responsiveness of our site, and that's going to be this meta tag here, which basically just tells the site not to shrink to fit. It's going to be a little bit more responsive and kind of interact with the browser that we're utilizing. So this is the viewport meta tag. I'm just going to copy and paste that into mine instead of typing the whole thing. And that goes beneath the character set of UTF-8. And I can just kind of reference this page here. This is the very basic starting point of what we're trying to duplicate on our end. It shows us that they have the HTML tag, the head tags, body tags, etc., as well as all of the links to what else we need to use. So this is going to be a link to CSS on a content delivery network. You can see it here, the CDN. This, we don't need to have the files downloaded on our end if we want to link to it this way through a hosted library online. I'm going to show you both ways. I'll link to some of them through our files as well as possibly using a content delivery network for one of these. So in our files, as I mentioned, I've already downloaded these. So let's go ahead and try and get the style sheet set up on our end. And we know that's going to go in the head section. Let's put it here. So I need to make sure I have these files first. And I've put everything in a reference folder here. This is just like some images that I'm going to be using and some sketches as well as the Bootstrap files that I've downloaded. So I'm going to open this Bootstrap file up and you'll see that I have a folder of CSS as well as a folder of JavaScript files. So let's go ahead and copy these into our actual folder, which is back here. I want these JavaScript and CSS folders next to my HTML. So what I'll do is I'll just grab these and I'm going to copy them right next to my HTML folder. So in here, I already have my Bootstrap CSS as well as my JavaScript CSS files. There are going to be multiple files in here. You'll see different options for things such as the reboot grid, Bootstrap itself, and then you'll also see minified versions of these, which is kind of like a condensed file size version of this. It removes a lot of the spaces from the file to just simply reduce the file size for loading times. But we really only need to concern ourselves with a few of these. For the CSS, we want this bootstrap.css. So in my head section, I need to link to that. And if you'll remember from your previous classes, in order to do that, I will just go ahead and link to this style sheet. And then I'll set my href, and I need to find this. I know that it's going to be in my CSS folder. And we know that we want just this bootstrap.css version down here. So I can link to that and then close that link. So this is going to be a link to the Bootstrap CSS in my file. And I know that that file is within a CSS folder, and I just want it to be bootstrap.css. So you can see that this file location here links to that. I'm going to save this and refresh. And you can see that the font changed. So that was one of their default styles for the body text there. If I want to also double check this link as I'm working with this, I can right click and choose View Page Source. And then I can click on this CSS file or anything else that I've linked to really and double check that it made that connection correctly. So this looks like it loaded, which means that connection is properly set up. And you can see the version number as well as copyrights and all that good stuff there. So I can close this down. And here we are at our HTML file again. So if I wanted to do that without downloading everything, I could just grab this line of text here, and this will show me what this looks like on a CDN. So this essentially is doing the same thing. It's linked to the Bootstrap minified version. I can save this and refresh, and you can see that the text is still there. So this is just hosted online, so I don't have to download it. You can see that there's all of the space is removed, so it just takes up less space in terms of file size. And you have some options there. You can do it either way. I would probably challenge yourselves to download it and do it within your files, just so you can get the experience of downloading and organizing those files as well as linking to them on your end. So now that I have my CSS set up, the next thing to do is work on setting up the JavaScript files. And if I go back to my Bootstrap page, you can see that there are three JavaScript files that I need to have associated with my work. And it says many of our components require the use of JavaScript to function. Specifically, they require jQuery, Popper.javascript, and their own JavaScript plugins. So those are the three files, and you have to link them in a very specific order. So you can see that we're linking jQuery first, then we have the popper.js file, then they're linking bootstrap.js. And you do it in this order because bootstrap.js requires certain features of jQuery or Popper. So jQuery is another library that allows different JavaScript elements to work. It has a lot of functionality for plugins in it, so we load that first. So let's go back to our files, and I want to look in JavaScript. So it looks like they're only giving us the Bootstrap file. They don't necessarily give us the Popper file or the jQuery. So for this, we're going to use two of the CDN links, and then we'll link to our Bootstrap here. So again, you can do it either way. You could use all of these if you'd like, but just for the sake of getting some different practice in, we'll do both. So for the first one, let's go ahead and grab our JavaScript jQuery. I just copy this. And based on the template, this is going to go at the end of our page, towards the bottom above the closing body tag. So that would mean down here, go ahead and give ourselves some space, and I can insert the, this is going to be my jQuery tag there. So we've linked to our jQuery. Then I need the others, so I'll go ahead and get Popper as well, and load that in as well. And now for the third one, we know that we need the actual bootstrap.javascript file, so I'll just go ahead and do the same thing here and just say script source equals, we go into our JavaScript folder and we want JavaScript bootstrap.js. And then I can close that. So that should link to all three of our required JavaScript libraries here now. So another good thing to do along the way is to leave in some comment tags here. So I'll just say begin required JS libraries and put that down here towards the bottom. Give myself a little bit more space for my actual content there and save that. So now we've got everything set up for the basic Bootstrap enabled site. So we can do whatever we want with this in terms of building our own website. And we'll take a look at their grid as well as their navigation structure and go from there. All right, so now that we've got everything set up, the next thing that I'm going to show you is to find in the Bootstrap page their documentation, and we'll take a look at some of their elements or JavaScript file kind of add-ins that we can use that come with Bootstrap. So the first thing that I want to do is let's go to components. So in the documentation, if you click on components, this will show you everything that is a component included with Bootstrap. So for example, the first one is alerts, and you see these different styled alert boxes there, and it gives you a visual representation of that, as well as the code that shows this for you, how to do that. So what I'll do is I'm just going to copy this to make sure everything is working, and I'll just grab that. Different links, let's see, let's say we want buttons. I can add different buttons to our page. Cards. Card is just like an image with a caption, a carousel. So you can see that there are a lot of features that come with Bootstrap that we can kind of implement by just accessing this framework. So you can just kind of look around in this and see what you might want to bring into your website. So for ours, let's say I grabbed that alert. I can just, let's place that here and then save, just so we can see, okay, it's styled properly, our CSS is working, etc. So for the nav bar, let's start with the nav bar. On the left, where you see the nav bar, I can scroll down and kind of see an example of what their nav bar looks like. This is going to be a responsive nav bar. It has a drop-down feature built in, and it will work very well with what we're doing. So I'm going to actually grab this code here all the way from the top down to the bottom and copy that into my work. So I know that I want my navigation above all of this. So I'll just space down my hello world and then place this in here. And I've copied that text in. I can save it and then go back to my page and refresh. And you can see that now we have our navigation in here set up properly. So one thing that you want to do at this point is to click on this dropdown to make sure that the dropdown is working properly. If you don't get this dropdown working properly, then that means that your JavaScript files are not linked successfully. So double check all three of those and make sure that they're linked properly and in order. If you don't see any of this kind of visual style of the navbar, then you want to double check your CSS. So you have to have all of those Bootstrap libraries successfully connected in order for this to work properly. Something else you can check is the responsiveness of this web navigation menu. So if I take my web browser and just kind of shrink it, you'll see right at about here is where it goes to a hamburger icon on the right and becomes that different responsive layout. So at this point I can click on this to double check this as well and make sure that all of my drop downs are working. So it looks like we're good. The navigation menu is in there properly. So that's good there. Now what I want to do next is start to build some of my layout for my actual website. And I have my trusty little sketch that I've done for my website in my reference folder, and this is it. So this is going to be my general structure of the website that I'm going to design. You should have something similar to this. Of course, maybe it's a little bit more in depth based on your Cornerstone project so far. So you should already have your wireframes and mockups designed. Now we just need to kind of translate that into our website. So I have an idea of what I'm going to do with my website. I want my navigation up here towards the top. I want kind of a featured header image here in the top section with some text in it. I want a couple different columns of copy below it. Maybe have an inset photo and then some typography off to the side. And then close everything off with a footer. These are going to be my social media buttons, as well as potentially a copyright or some more information in here in the right section of the footer. So that's going to be the general structure of the website. Now it just comes down to figuring out how to use the Bootstrap grid to build this layout within my code. The next step is going to be actually adding some of the content to our website. So based on our image, let's find a way to add this feature section here towards the top. And what I'll do is go to the Bootstrap documentation and find in components, there's something called a Jumbotron. And this is just going to be a lightweight, flexible component for showcasing hero unit style content. So this is an example of just kind of a styled Jumbotron. You might be able to set the background color. It looks like there's a little bit of a rounded edge there. It comes with some of the styling for the text. and this is the code beneath this. So basically, we're going to make a div with the class of Jumbotron, and then all of this is the text content within it, a couple heading tags, paragraph tags, and so forth. So in our code, what I'll do is I'm going to place my div class equals Jumbotron, break this div down, the closing div at the end of that. Let's do the same thing. Let's just make a heading tag, and I'll name this, or I'll give this the text of my site, so boats and more. And then let's say we have a paragraph with some, this is filler text. We can just space this out for now and utilize this just to give us a little bit of copy to play with. Save that, and then let's refresh. So you can see that this is our Jumbotron. It's given us that gray background. There's a little bit of a rounded edge there. And it's going to be the entire width of this particular page because I don't have this within something called a container. So this element will span to the entirety of the page. Now, I kind of want everything confined to a particular width, and I can do that by using my Bootstrap grid as well as a container to kind of contain everything within this layout. So I'll go back to my documentation and let's go to layout and then grid. So Bootstrap comes with a very flexible, responsive grid that I can utilize to set up my layout. And it's going to be based off of 12 columns. So I can break up my space into 12 columns however I'd like. I can have 6 columns on the left and 6 columns on the right. I can have 4 columns of 3 wide columns to equal 12. So I can use this space based on my layout however I'd like. Now, down here towards the examples, you can see that I can make equal width columns. Here's one example of a row right here, 2 columns that are broken evenly down the middle. This row shows me that I have 3 columns equally spaced. So these would be 6 wide on the top, and then below these would be 4 column space wide divs. You can see based on the code for this first example that they have everything wrapped in a container, then they have a row, and then they have their columns within there. So in order for this to work, you have to have everything within a container, you have to have everything within a row, and then you have to put your content within columns. And they're doing that by making divs with different classes on them. So these are going to be the actual Bootstrap dictated classes. You have to use these classes as they've been established in order to get the full benefit of them. So you don't need to do any numbering or changing or making them unique. You can reuse these as many times as you'd like. So based on this, this is showing us that they've broken the space up into 2 and then 3 columns accordingly. So if you want them equal spaced, you don't need to put anything after this column abbreviation, just COL will break them evenly. Now another way that you can do this is to change the actual width of these kind of at different increments. So here in the first row example, they've got them equally spaced. They're just using COL. That will break that 12 columns evenly amongst these divs. If you want to have kind of an uneven break, you can add a number to this. So for example, here this first column is going to be 8 spaces wide, and the second one is going to be 4 spaces wide. So you can see that there's more space on the left than there is the right because they've broken that 12 columns into an uneven increment. So that's how you're going to tell the grid how much space you want each of your divs to take up. You can either do it equidistantly, such as this first row example, or you can put in specific numbers here for your own columns based on your layout. So in this example here, for my layout, I have my Jumbotron set up. Let's say I want this to be 4 equidistant columns. I could just use that column class. And then beneath it, I have kind of a smaller column on the left for an image, and then a text column on the right that's a little bit larger. I could possibly use something like this offset column setup here. So you want to brainstorm how your layout breaks down in terms of column layouts for Bootstrap and have that kind of in your mind before you start coding. The next step that we're going to do is actually make that structure and then add our content to it. So let's go back to our code now, and based on what we just learned, we know that everything needs to be contained within a container, and that will kind of contain or confine our layout to a specific pixel width. And you can see that the container width on these different breakpoints will be specific pixels wide. So on extra large devices, our container will be 1140 pixels wide. And then these are the different breakpoints here. So on larger medium devices as well as small devices, you can see how that breakpoint container will be in terms of the space of pixels wide. So let's go ahead and add our container. And again, let's make some comments in here. So this will just be close Jumbotron div. I'll put that there. And around all of our content, I want to make a container div. So I can make div class equals container, and then I want to move the closing container div to the bottom. And as soon as I do this, I'm going to do the same thing and leave a comment, close main grid container. That way, once this thing is pushed all the way down towards the bottom of my page and there's a lot of content within it, I still know where this div goes. That goes to the beginning of my container, and I can see it kind of highlighted if I click on either one of these. So my Jumbotron div will be within this container now. So let's save this and then check this out. So on the actual homepage now, you remember this is going to be kind of the width of the page. If I refresh it, now it's constrained to the width of that container based on that pixel dimension, and that pixel dimension we know is going to be 1140. And if I take this down to kind of shrink this, you can see that container change sizes based on those different breakpoints. So you can see that navigation button changes, the container's getting a little bit smaller, and those are going to be your different breakpoints. So we'll be able to see how our site is responding as if this would be viewed on potentially a mobile device or a tablet. So you want to kind of keep an eye on that as you're working on your site overall. So now that I have my Jumbotron image in there, or excuse me, my background color, what I'll do next is make the structure for our columns here. And let's make a row with 4 equidistant spaced paragraphs there. So what I need to do for that is, let's go ahead and remove the hello world. It's served its purpose. For this next step, what I need to do is make a row. So I'll go ahead and open a div with a class of row. And then do the same thing, take our closing div, and we can just put that right here and comment close first row. And in here we know we're going to have 4 columns. So let's go ahead and open a div with a class of column and break this down a little bit. This will be first column text. Paragraph. Let's make that a paragraph. And at this point, this is going to be our first column within the row. So we know that we want to have 4 equidistant columns, so I can just essentially copy and paste this. That would be my second one, my third paragraph, and my fourth paragraph. Let's go ahead and write second, third, fourth, and then save it. So you can see that I've made my row a div with a class of row. There are my div with classes of columns. I should have 4 of those. And let's save and refresh in our browser and see what that gets us. So you can see that those 4 divs are spaced out equidistantly from one another, and they're within the container, so they fill that space accordingly. So at this point, I'm just kind of trying to make the structure of my layout, and then I'll go back in and add any of the content that I need within here, such as specific paragraph text or actual text for our website and images. So let's go to the next row. So here, I know that this is my first row. Remember, you can add as many rows as you want. You can reuse these classes. So when I get to the next one, I just want to start this after this first row. I'm still within my container, so that would mean that I can just put it right here. And let's make another div with a class of row. And then break this down, and I'll say close second row, making sure to keep it nice and organized and comment it along the way. Now, again, one thing that I noticed a lot of students do is they have a tendency to number these, so they might put row 2. You don't have to do that. Remember, you can reuse these classes, as well as the fact that if you did change this by adding a number to it, you're removing the Bootstrap functionality of the row class. You always want it to be just row, just like that. And now this one, I want to do that little offset here. So let's say we want this first column to be 4 spaces wide, and then on the right, let's make this about 8. So what I'll do is div class equals column. Now the next section here is a breakpoint, and let's say we want this to be at large screens or at that largest breakpoint. I want this space to be about 4 columns wide. You can do that by typing call for column large. This is our large breakpoint, and 4. I want this to be 4 of 12 spaces wide. So on this, I could put left column, and then the next column, I want this to take up, this needs to take up the balance of 12. So I'll make this column large equals 8. 8 plus 4 gives me 12. So this should be that right column for the offset, the balance of 12. And I'll just name this, or I'll put my text in here, right column. And then I can save this, and let's refresh. So here we have our first row, and then our left column, as well as a right column for our photograph, as well as some paragraph text. Now, it's kind of hard to see at this point what exactly these columns are doing. So what I'll do is add some CSS to this so that we can a little bit more visually see the particular layout that is happening here. And in order to do that, we need a new file, and we need to make a style sheet. So I'll make a new file, and this I'll just call, let's just call it style sheet. That's going to be my comment. Save as. Now here I want this to go in my CSS, and I'm just going to call this style.css. So we want to put this in our CSS folder next to all of this Bootstrap, and you can name it anything you'd like. Style or styles is fine. I'll name it style.css and save this. And let's go ahead and link this to our main document. So in our index file, let's link this beneath our Bootstrap style sheet, because if we ever want to override anything in Bootstrap, we want our style sheet to load after the Bootstrap CSS. So let's go ahead and link our style sheet to our page, and then href css, and then we want to find our CSS file, which is just style.css. So that should be linked accordingly. And let's just make a quick little class here called, let's say, red border. And then in red border, let's make border equals 1 pixel solid red, just so I can add this to anything that I want to kind of see a border. So I made a new class here by using my period to show that this is going to be a class. I can copy this and then go back to my index file, and let's say let's do it on this row here. So I can add that class to any of these. Remember, if I want to add multiple classes to this, say I want to style this left column, I can just put a space after the class that's already in there, and then go ahead and put my red border class onto this div, and I'll do the same thing down here, add a space to show that I'm adding a second class. I'll add in my red border class, and then save it, and come over here and refresh. So you can see visually that this is where those columns are breaking up. If it's just text like that, it may be hard to see, but this is in fact 4 column spaces wide and then 8 on the right. I can do that up here as well. Let's just, maybe we show it on 2 of them just to kind of see what's going on. And you can see that that's 4 columns equally spaced as well in that particular section. So now that we have those 2 columns, the only other thing that we need to add to this really is the footer section down towards the bottom. So in order to do that, let's say, let's see where we're closing. So this is our main container here. We want to put everything after that main container, which is going to be this kind of interior content section. And then we can put a footer below that. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and just start our footer tag, break this down a little bit, and then within the footer, we can do the same thing that we did in the main section of our website, and that is just actually to have another container. We can have another container within this that includes our rows as well as columns for our text or our content. So in our footer, let's go ahead and add a new container. And then I know that I want to have a row. And then within this row, let's make our 2 columns. We can just kind of, maybe we space them equally at this point. So let's do 2 columns here. So this is going to be, let's just call it footer left for now, and footer right. In this container, let's make sure we leave a note here. So this is going to be my close footer container. And this is going to be my close first footer row. You can add any notes in here that you'd like. I just try and name it or add a comment that is kind of similar to what it is so that I know where these divs are closing, what it's closing, and so forth. This one's pretty self-explanatory because it's just the footer tag, so I know what that is. Let's save this and then refresh. And now you can see that we're going to have our little footer down here as well. And now at this point, we've kind of got the general structure here. It just comes down to, at this point, going back to the actual grid structure and adding some style to this, maybe adding the images, adding the paragraphs, and kind of bringing it to life. So we'll do that next. So now that we have our general wireframe structure set up, it comes down to going back to our code and adding anything that we might need to this, such as images and actual content. So for our, let's go to the Jumbotron. Let's try and actually style some of this Jumbotron here, and we can use, let's do a background image for this. So for our Jumbotron, we can go into our style sheet, and I'll just copy this class just so I don't have to type it. Now here, what I can do is add a new class for Jumbotron, and I want to style this with a background image. So in my CSS file, I can add the background image property, and this I know needs to be URL and then parentheses. And for finding the image from our style sheet, what I need to do is actually go up a folder or back a folder, and I could do that by adding 2 periods and a /, because right now I'm in my style sheet, which is right here. So I need to go up a folder, which is back, and then before I do this, let's go ahead and get some images in here. So I'll make an image folder in here as well. And let's say I need an images folder. And in my references, I've got a boat background as well as a sailboat image that I can use. And I'm just going to put these in my images folder just so I have those already. So you want to probably make an images folder and then organize your files in there. So I need to go up from my style sheet into an images folder, and then let's pick boat BG. So I need to go into an images folder, and then let's pick boat background, and that should do it for the background image. Now let's save it, go back here and refresh. And you can see that the image is back there. Now we have a little bit of an issue with the text, which is fine. We can always adjust that. And the height. The height's a little bit off too. I want to maybe see a little bit more of that image. So let's maybe add some height to this. Let's try and see what 500 pixels looks like. So that looks pretty good. Might be a little bit taller than what the image is. This image is actually 482 pixels tall, so let's say we do 450 and see what that looks like. Perfect, that looks much better. So if I want to then also style the text in here, just the color property is going to change the color of the text. So let's say we want that to be white's probably okay. And here we go. So that text is now updated. Another thing that I do is this Jumbotron is fairly close to the top of the navigation. What we can do there is just add some margin. So maybe we add some margin top. Let's add about 15 pixels and see what that looks like. I just kind of scooted it down a little bit so there's a little bit of negative space there. Let's do a little bit more. 20 is probably okay. So now that we've done the Jumbotron, I've just added a background image to it. I've changed the height property a little bit, as well as changed that margin top to give it some padding up there, and then I made my text white so I can see it. And another thing we could do, again, we want to kind of be mindful of our breakpoints. So let's see what this does at different breakpoints. You can see how that's changing and kind of affecting the images and the text that is within it. Something that you can do here, this image kind of works okay. It doesn't really, I mean, I guess, we kind of want the boat in there because of the name of the website, but something that we can do is add a background size property to this. And let's say we do cover and save that and refresh. You can see it change a little bit, but what the cover does is now when this resizes, it will kind of fit in here a little bit better. Let me actually take off my height. I don't want this height right now. So this will change that width to always fit in there. So you can see that it kind of changes with it. You have to choose between adding the height or the cover. You could have both of them in there, but basically cover will ensure that that image always covers that background. So if it were smaller than the width of the page, it will cover to fill it, and vice versa. If it's too big, it will kind of fit in there. If it's way too big, it will cover. Let's do both. I actually kind of like how we have that height in there, so it always stays that height. If it gets cropped off, I guess that's just kind of how it's going to be. So that's looking good. Now also notice what happens to these columns down here towards the bottom. You can see that they are broken up into different columns now, but at those different breakpoints, if I make this a little bit smaller, right about here, you can see that the left and right column kind of stack on top of one another, and then a little bit further in, you can see that those top ones always kind of space out, and that's because we don't have those breakpoints set in terms of the width, in terms of large, medium, or small. So we can change that in just a moment. So you can see the difference between when those columns stack versus just kind of continuing to be a little bit smaller if we don't have that breakpoint set. So let's play with that a little bit. We're at that section now, and I need a little bit more text in there. So let's find my first column paragraph. And let's make a paragraph tag. I just need a little bit more of this. Nope, that's not what I want to do. Copy that. See what that looks like. That's probably okay. Okay, so now let's also add a heading tag as well. So there's something else in there. Perfect. So let's do something here where, let me add the rest of this. I want to just make sure I have some more paragraph text here in all of these. me grab this whole thing. Just making sure I have enough text to play with here. That should do it. Okay, so let's change how these columns work at different breakpoints. So right now, again, they're all kind of equidistant, but let's say on large devices, we want this to take up 3 spaces wide. And on medium devices, let's say we want them to take up 6. So you can have different breakpoints set here. So we've added 2 classes to this column. So instead of just using this equidistant version, we can say on large devices, I would like this column to take up 3 spaces, which would give us the 4. If I go to medium devices, I want this to take up 6, which will be half of that row. So let's grab that. And I want to replace all of these with the same thing so they all kind of perform the same way. Save it and refresh. You don't see any difference here, but if I go to my medium breakpoint, which should be here, they stack next to one another, 6 and 6. And that should stay like that. And then they kind of go to the single column. So you have some control and choices over what these columns do at each particular breakpoint. So we have all of these different breakpoints to choose from. So extra large is going to be XL, large is going to be large. This is the one that I just set medium. So at medium devices, once we get to that, how do I want those columns to look? I could declare as many of these as I'd like, small. So you've got your 4 breakpoints, or you can kind of have it do it automatically by just using that column as I did previously before I edited this because I didn't really like the way it was functioning. So you can have a little bit more control over how that works. So this is looking pretty good, aside from this really tacky red border that I have in here, which I can of course remove once I'm done with that. Let's go down to the next row, and based on our handy dandy wireframe, we know that we need an image on the left as well as some text on the right. So for that, let's go ahead and just grab our paragraph again. In the right column, we know that we want this to be in here, and I'll make this a little bit longer this time. Just gonna put some more text in there. Now for our image, you'd place the image just kind of, how you do. Let's go to our image, source equals, this is just standard HTML image placing. So I'll go to image, and then let's say we want our sailboat image, and then I can close that image tag and save it and refresh. Now, here's the thing. I've put that image in there, but that image is fairly large. So you can see how this space is being broken up. It's still broken into those 2 columns, but my image is significantly larger than that column space, so it's oversetting that column. I need to be able to figure out how to make that a little bit smaller to fit back within that column so I don't have this weird overlap. And as it would turn out, in Bootstrap there is a class for responsive images. So in our content section of the documentation, we can go to images, and this says for responsive images, images in Bootstrap are made responsive with the image fluid class. So this means that the 100% width is going to be set as well as height to auto. So this will just kind of fill the space of whatever that image is placed within. In this particular situation, it's placed within this div, so it should just kind of fill that space. So in order to do that, here, what I can do is on my image tag, I can put a class, and that's just going to be image fluid based on the documentation for the responsive image. And you can save that and then refresh. So what that's done is it's taken that image and set the width of the image to 100% of this column, and then the height to auto, which means it's just going to kind of constrain the proportions. So that will fit in there a little bit more effectively. Let's go ahead and maybe we remove the borders, but just to kind of recap, what we're doing is building that grid first and then going back in and inputting anything such as our actual text, our headings, our images. So you'd want to replace this with the text from your actual mockups or from the research that you've done in terms of building out your website. All right, this is looking pretty good so far. The next thing that we can do is work on our footer. So for the footer, let's see what we have. We have some social media icons on the left and then maybe a copyright or contact information on the right. So we can find some images. I found some images online that I've downloaded. Usually you can find these kind of packaged, available to download. So let's say we get, let's do Facebook, Twitter, and I don't know, Instagram maybe. Sure, let's do Instagram. So we can get these three common social media platforms, and I'll just put these in my images folder so that I can utilize them a little bit easier. And then we can do the same thing and kind of place these in here. So instead of footer left, I know this is going to be my images, so I can just kind of replace that with my image source. Images, let's start with Facebook. And then let's do the next one. Let's say we want Twitter, and making sure I don't have any typos. Then we can do image source equals Instagram and place those. Save and refresh it. Now, these are fairly large, so I'd have to go back and style these. Let's make a class for these. Maybe I can just add social button, and I want to add that to all of these. Okay, in my style sheet, let's add a class for social button, and let's just change the size. Let's do 50 pixels, height 50 pixels, then that made them a little bit smaller. On the right-hand side, let's just do copyright boats, and for send more. All right, and this, I want that to be, I'll just add a quick inline style there to make that right aligned. You could make a class or style this in your style sheet, but for the sake of argument, I'll just make an inline style, which is the most direct way, even though it's not maybe the most optimal. It'll serve the purpose here. The next thing that I want to do is let's just add a little bit of space here, and maybe we add a footer color for the background here. So in my style sheet, let's add code to style our actual footer, and let's do background color. Let's do a nice, maybe like a medium gray. Let's do dark, maybe dark gray. See what that looks like. That looks pretty good. So that will be our footer, and I can just kind of space out. Maybe we add a little bit of a space on the top. Give it a little bit of space around these icons. And I'll do some bottom padding as well. That way you have a little bit more of kind of some chunk in there. That's probably too much. Let's go with maybe, let's do 40, see what 40 looks like. It's probably okay for this. And let's also add a margin on the top. I want to kind of space that out a little bit. That looks good. So you can see that I've just kind of gone through and I'm starting to work with the CSS in terms of placing things, maybe giving a little bit more space around certain elements. I'm working through going back in here and adding in my actual content and all of my paragraph text and images. So the idea is to build that structure first and make sure it's working, make sure that everything is responding properly, and then go back in and replace all of your placeholder text with your actual copy. That way you're not trying to like make this layout as you go. You want to make the layout first and then just replace or input that content. That way you don't get too confused and you know that everything is still going to be working as you place that content in it. So we're just about there. A couple more things that I want to do. I don't really need that border anymore. It's kind of served its purpose, so I can go ahead and remove that. I like to use the border just so I can see what exactly the layout is doing before I start putting stuff in it. I can add that back in or remove it as I go just to kind of double check things and see if there's anything else that needs to be just like reviewed in terms of the grid structure. So you can use or remove that as much as you'd like to kind of get the benefit from it. So this is looking pretty good. We can double check at this point the responsiveness of it. Looks like everything is still fitting. You can see that at this breakpoint that image does in fact go to a single column, and it also scales because it's now 100% of the column, which is larger at this point. So that will then kind of fill that, and then below it's still going to scale because we're not using a pixel width to set the pixel width of that image. It's just a percentage, so it's always going to be 100% of that particular column. So you want to keep that in mind as you're working, is that try not to use pixel dimensions for things such as widths or heights. And that goes both for divs as well as images, because if you do, then those elements are going to be less likely to become responsive. This website's very fluid based, very responsive at this point, because we're just using percentage-based layout to have this become flexible based on where I'm viewing this website on, such as a mobile device versus a computer. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as you progress with this. So we're just about done here. The only other thing that you might need to do is, of course, update the search bar here, or excuse me, the navigation bar. So you bring this in by default, how it kind of comes with everything. This is a styled unordered list with list items within it. So these are the different list items for the different buttons. So you can see, let's see, so here's the first list item. You can see home, that's right here. This one here, link, let's say we change this to about and save it. That's going to change this to about. Drop down, the next section is the drop down. So, we can put, maybe put activities in here, change that to activities. You can remove any of these if you don't want something, like I don't need this disabled one. Make sure you get the list item, because the way this is working is that each button is a list item. So I can remove this list item and let's say I don't want that. I can delete that, and that one is now gone. So you can kind of look at the code and manipulate what is in there. Something else to note in the navigation is that the home page currently has something called active. This is an active class on that link, on that list item. If I take that and say, for instance, on my second page, I put that on about, I can move that to this class here for that button. Actually, I want this on nav item active. So that will put that active class on that particular button, and then you'd want to remove it from home. So that's going to be that kind of like darkened section of the navigation to show which page you're on. And that you can do by moving this little active class on each particular list item per page. Whichever page you're on, you can kind of move that to show which page is active. So that's something you can do in the navigation. So make sure you update that. Make sure you update the different pound signs here to the actual HTML files to link the navigation. You would do that just like any other HTML link that you've created previously. And that's pretty much it for updating what's in there in terms of the navigation, as well as filling in the content. So in a nutshell, this has shown you how to do a couple things. We've started the HTML file. We've linked to all of the required Bootstrap files, which are CSS files as well as JavaScript files. There's a few different ways to link to those based on your own local files versus a content delivery network. From there, we've tested some of the features, such as the buttons and navigation, to make sure everything is working. We've also covered the Bootstrap responsive grid and how to set up your columns in a way that gives you a really flexible layout for your site. And then we played with inputting and manipulating some content. From here, what you would do is start this for your site, input all of your layout and structure details for the grid and navigation, make sure everything is working properly, and then put in your content from there. Once you have that homepage done, the next step will be copying that to create multiple interior pages. But for this week's assignment, all you're doing is the wireframe for just the home page. That way we can make sure we're all on the same track and everything is working properly before we get too far ahead of ourselves. So let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and we'll go from there. Thank you.